A powerful wave of emotions surged within her, offering both comfort and danger. She gently reached out to touch the man of shadow, feeling the warmth of his body seep into her fingertips like an electric current running down her spine. In that moment, she realized that her life had changed irreversibly. Outside, the wind still howled, but Elise no longer paid attention to anything around her. She sank into silence, with only shadow by her side and a secret growing, weaving through the darkness like a flame about to ignite. Elise stood still in the stable, her hand resting softly on Shadow's body, her gaze lost in the distant void. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of dry grass, damp earth, and the warm breath of the horse standing quietly beside her. My name is Elise. I am 36 years old, and for the past 5 years, I have been Felix's wife. Our story began with the kind of romance one might only dream of, set against the picturesque backdrop of his family's horse ranch. It was there, amidst rolling meadows and the gentle neighing of horses, that our love for each other blossomed. But perhaps it was Shadow, the majestic black stallion we both adored, who tied us together from the very beginning. Felix and I shared countless moments of joy and connection with Shadow. We would ride him across endless fields, the wind carrying our laughter as we ventured into the golden embrace of the countryside. Shadow wasn't just a horse, he was a companion, a witness to the deep bond we nurtured. Even on our wedding day, it was Shadow who carried me to Felix, guided by my father, as if to remind us of the journey we had begun together. The first years of our marriage were a mix of passion and partnership. Life on the ranch seemed idyllic, almost timeless. But time has a way of testing even the strongest of bonds. Felix, ambitious as he always was, grew restless with the simplicity of ranch life. He longed for something more, a chance to prove himself in the business world. Despite my misgivings, I supported him as he and his friends pooled their resources to start a company. At first, I admired his determination, even as it began to pull him away from our quiet life. The ranch, once filled with shared laughter and whispered promises, became quieter with each passing day. Felix immersed himself in his new venture, working tirelessly to overcome the initial challenges. But as his business began to thrive, our relationship began to unravel. The man who once spent his mornings brushing Shadow's mane with me and his evenings talking about our dreams now seemed like a stranger. His world became consumed by contracts, meetings, and phone calls. Slowly but surely, he began to forget the small, tender gestures that had made me feel so loved. A kiss on the forehead, a hand held in the quiet of the evening, those moments disappeared, replaced by an ever-growing distance. At first, I tried to bridge the gap, but Felix was always too busy or too tired to notice. Every attempt to connect was met with indifference, and soon, I found it easier to retreat than to fight for his attention. In my loneliness, I turned to the one constant in my life, Shadow. Shadow had always been more than a horse to me, but now he became my sanctuary. I would spend hours with him, brushing his sleek coat, feeling the warmth of his presence. Together, we would wander the trails Felix and I had once explored. The silence between Felix and me was deafening, but with Shadow, I felt heard, as though he could sense every unspoken word. In those quiet moments with Shadow, I found an outlet for my frustrations and sorrow. I poured my heart out to him, sharing my anger, my hurt, and my longing. He listened without judgment, his dark eyes filled with a wisdom that felt almost human. The ranch, which had once been a symbol of my love with Felix, became a refuge for my solitude. And then, something unexpected began to stir within me. At first, I dismissed it as nothing more than gratitude for Shadow's companionship. But the more time I spent with him, the more I felt a strange, unexplainable pull. It was as if Shadow understood me in a way no one else could, not even Felix. These feelings terrified me. How could I, a grown woman, find myself so deeply connected to a creature who couldn't speak, who couldn't offer me the kind of love I once had with Felix? Yet, the connection was undeniable. It was as though Shadow could see through the walls I had built around my heart, offering me a sense of closeness I hadn't felt in years. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the confusion. Each time I stood beside Shadow, I felt both comforted and unsettled, as if I were teetering on the edge of a revelation I wasn't ready to face. Shadow had become more than a companion. He had become the keeper of my secrets, the one who truly understood the depths of my heart. As I stood in the barn one quiet evening, my hand resting on Shadow's powerful neck, I realized that my life was at a crossroads. The love I once shared with Felix felt like a distant memory, and the feelings stirring within me for Shadow left me questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. In the stillness of that moment, with Shadow's steady presence grounding me, I knew one thing for certain: my heart was no longer Felix's alone. But where that truth would lead me, I could not yet say. The growing distance and lack of connection between Felix and me had become unbearable. Our arguments grew more frequent, each one more heated than the last. Then came the day Felix sat me down and, in his usual matter-of-fact tone, announced his decision to sell the ranch and move to the city. He spoke of convenience, how living in the city would make it easier for him to manage his business. He painted a picture of a new life, funded by the sale of the ranch, which would provide a substantial sum to invest in his company. But all I could see was the destruction of the life we had built together. I was stunned, unable to process the weight of his words. The ranch wasn't just land to me, it was home. It held countless memories of our love, our laughter, and of Shadow. Shadow, who had been more than a horse, more than a companion. Just the thought of losing him made my chest tighten, as if the very air had been stolen from my lungs. "No," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and defiance. "I can't leave this place, Felix. And I won't let you sell Shadow. He's family." Felix's expression hardened, his patience fraying. "Elise, you're being unreasonable. This is about our future, my future. I need to move forward, and the ranch is holding us back." His words struck me like a blow. The ranch wasn't holding us back. It was the heart of everything we were. Yet, to him, it had become just another obstacle to overcome, another deal to close. Our argument escalated rapidly, voices rising like a storm gathering strength. Every unspoken resentment, every unhealed wound spilled out between us. He accused me of clinging to the past, of refusing to see reason. I accused him of abandoning everything that mattered, including me. Then, in a moment of sheer frustration, Felix grabbed his coat and keys. "I can't do this right now," he snapped, his voice cold and final. He turned on his heel, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut behind him. The sound echoed through the house, leaving an unbearable silence in its wake. I stood frozen, staring at the closed door, my chest heaving with anger and despair. The weight of his absence hit me all at once, and I crumpled onto the couch, tears streaming down my face. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows as if mirroring the storm inside me. The cold seeped into the room, but I didn't care. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed, the sound of my heartbreak swallowed by the unforgiving night. In my sorrow and pain, I decided to visit Shadow, feeling as though only he could soothe the turmoil within me. Rushing out of the house, I clutched my thin coat tightly against the biting cold wind. The gusts howled across the empty field, their chill cutting to the bone, but nothing could slow my steps. Darkness blanketed everything around me, leaving only the faint glow of the lantern hanging outside the stable as a beacon. It called to me, pulling me closer with an irresistible force. I stopped before the heavy wooden door, my chest heaving as my heart pounded so violently it felt like it might break free. From inside the stable, the faint sound of hooves shifting echoed softly, accompanied by subtle movements. It felt as if Shadow was waiting for me, as if he already knew I was coming. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking sharply and cutting through the oppressive silence. Inside, Shadow stood tall and majestic. His deep, dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that seemed to pierce my soul. I swallowed hard and took cautious, measured steps toward him. The air in the stable felt heavy, laden with an unspoken tension, as if every breath, every movement, carried a weight of meaning. "You're waiting for me, aren't you?" My voice broke the stillness, barely more than a whisper, soft and vulnerable, like a confession. Shadow tilted his head slightly, a small gesture yet one filled with significance, as if to answer my question without words. There was something in his gaze, a profound understanding, an unspoken connection, that rooted me to the spot, unable to look away. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, truly heard, in a way Felix had never made me feel. A powerful wave of emotion surged through me, both comforting and perilous. Slowly, I reached out, my fingers brushing against Shadow's warm, sturdy form. The warmth radiating from him seeped into my fingertips, like an electric current running along my spine, sending shivers through me. At that moment, I knew my life had changed irreversibly. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but I no longer noticed. Everything around me faded into silence, leaving only Shadow and me, and a secret growing in the darkness, smoldering like a fire on the verge of ignition. The darkness pressed in around me like a living thing, pulsing with the promise of something about to ignite. Standing motionless in the stable, my hand rested lightly against Shadow's warm, steady form. My gaze drifted into the void, unfocused yet searching, as if the answers to my unspoken questions lay somewhere in the still night. I closed my eyes and drew in a deep breath, my lungs filling with the earthy scent of damp hay, soil, and the comforting warmth of the horse beside me. In this fragile silence, I felt as though I had escaped everything, the cold, soulless house, the echoing emptiness of its staircases, and the consuming loneliness that had eaten away at me for years. Memories surged over me like an unstoppable tide. There was a time when I had believed love could conquer anything. Felix and I had been inseparable, our passion burning so fiercely it seemed nothing could extinguish it. I remembered our first meeting, how his sharp wit and effortless charm had made me laugh until tears streamed down my face. I remembered the nights by the fire, sharing dreams of a radiant future, the way Felix had promised me he'd always be there, building a life together that we could both cherish. But those promises had long since turned into hollow echoes. As the years passed, Felix became consumed by his work, endless meetings, extended business trips, and late nights. The man who once held me so close seemed more like a stranger each day. I couldn't even recall the last time we'd had dinner without the shrill interruption of his phone. When Felix returned home, it was as if he were merely passing through. He'd drop his bag, offer me a quick embrace, and disappear behind the cold glow of his laptop screen. I had tried desperately to bridge the growing chasm between us. I planned romantic dinners, rekindled old conversations, and poured myself into salvaging what once was. But Felix always brushed me off with the same exhausted refrain, "I'm too tired." "Can we talk later?" Time, I'd once believed, could heal everything. Instead, it had only deepened the void between us, a yawning gulf that I could no longer cross. Felix wasn't a bad man, he wasn't unfaithful, angry, or even purposefully neglectful. But his indifference, his quiet absence, had made me feel as though I were fading, becoming a ghost in my own marriage. Now, as my hand rested against Shadow's flank, the warmth of his body grounding me, I felt a fragile calm settle over me, a calm laced with tension, as though the night itself were holding its breath. Shadow shifted slightly, his quiet movements breaking the heavy stillness. My chest tightened as a whisper of understanding passed between us, unspoken yet undeniable. This was the only place I truly felt seen, heard, and alive. The unyielding ache in my heart surged anew, but it was no longer just grief, it was something raw and dangerous, something I didn't yet dare to name. Outside, the wind howled like a warning, but I barely noticed. All I could feel was the pull of something inevitable, smoldering in the darkness, waiting for the spark that would set it ablaze. Emotions surged within me like waves crashing against the shore. Suddenly, I recalled something Philomena, the stable keeper, had once said to me: horses like Shadow can sense what humans often refuse to admit, that loneliness forms the deepest bonds. Now, as I stood before Shadow, her words echoed in my mind like a prophecy I was reluctant to acknowledge. But perhaps she had been right. It was my loneliness, the emptiness Felix could never fill, that had slowly drawn me closer to Shadow, step by step. I reached out hesitantly, my hand grazing Shadow's side, feeling the warmth radiating beneath my palm. "You know, Shadow," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the steady rhythm of his breath. Sometimes I wish I could be like you, free, unburdened, with no battles to fight." Of course, Shadow didn't answer. But his dark, knowing eyes met mine, and in their depths, I felt an understanding so profound it left me breathless. For a fleeting moment, a sense of relief washed over me, as if I had finally been heard without judgment. Yet, deep inside, I knew this moment of solace carried an undercurrent of something far greater. Things were changing, shifting in ways I couldn't control, and there was no turning back. As my hand glided through Shadow's sleek coat, the weight in my chest seemed to lift, replaced by a rare, electrifying calm that almost felt foreign to me. But then, the moment shifted. I couldn't recall what had caused me to act this way. Maybe it was the intensity in Shadow's eyes, or the subtle shift of his body, as though acknowledging the touch of my hand. Perhaps it was the storm inside me, the loneliness, the yearning, the void that no one could fill. My hand lingered on the side of his face, the warmth of his skin seeping through my fingers. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, but even that breath trembled. Shadow, his name escaped my lips, not in a call, but like a whispered confession. Shadow shifted, lowering his head, his stillness speaking volumes, full of understanding. His presence was overwhelming, like he could feel every inch of turmoil twisting inside me, without a single word spoken. Unable to pull my gaze away, my breath became shallow, faster, as if my entire body was being pulled into the storm that raged between us. The space between us seemed unbearable, an invisible divide I could no longer tolerate. I had to close it, had to bridge it. A moment passed, long, suspended, filled with a thick, charged silence. My hand moved to Shadow's chest, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my palm. But my own heart? It was a disarray of emotions, a chaotic mess, pulsing erratically, threatening to shatter the fragile calm I was clinging to. For the first time in my life, I stopped thinking. All the rules, all the boundaries, all the rational voices in my head, gone. What remained was raw desire, raw need, or perhaps a part of me I had buried deep for far too long. I leaned in slightly, my body moving toward him, and in that instant, the world around me seemed to collapse. I was no longer myself, the tired, hollow shell I had become. I was simply a woman overwhelmed, consumed by emotions I couldn't explain, swept away by a longing I had never anticipated. The reality that she had crossed a line she never thought she would step over was almost too much to comprehend. Then, a sudden noise shattered the tension, slicing through the silence like a blade. Anna froze, heart racing, as she turned toward the sound. The headlights of a car swept across the field, cutting through the darkness like a razor. Lucas. Her heart clenched, and she felt cold, paralyzed, standing there, unable to move. Her breath quickened as the car drew closer, the headlights flashing over the barn's wall, illuminating her pale, tortured face. She didn't know what she would say or do, only that every secret, every emotion she had buried deep inside her, was now teetering on the edge, ready to be exposed. The car came to a stop just outside the barn, and Lucas stepped out. His tall frame loomed in the headlights, casting a long shadow across the ground. The car door slammed shut with a sharp, final sound, and the silence quickly reclaimed the night air. He hesitated, scanning the area before making his way toward the barn. "Anna, are you there?" His voice was calm, as it always was, but to Anna, it felt like thunder cracking through the stillness of the night. She turned toward him, their gazes locking, and in that instant, she knew. He knew something, maybe not clearly, maybe it was just an instinctive feeling, but he knew. "I couldn't sleep," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her breath betrayed her with its tremor. "I just wanted to check on Shadow. I feel so lonely," she added, her voice cracking as tears began to fall down her cheeks. "I've felt this way for so long, and I don't know how to escape it. Everything with you, everything between us, it feels like it's all meaningless." Lucas didn't respond immediately. He stood there, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to uncover the truth buried behind her words. He had sought comfort in a place he should never have gone. My voice choked with emotion as I spoke. "I'm lost, Felix. I didn't know how to explain it, but I had crossed a line. Felix took a step back, his eyes widening as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Crossed a line, he repeated, his voice rough, almost a whisper. I felt my chest tighten, as though my heart was being crushed by an invisible hand. I don't know how to explain it, I whispered, the weight of my words heavy in the air. I just know I let myself go too far, and now, I can't go back. I braced myself for his anger. I expected him to shout or turn away, but he didn't. He stood there, staring at me, his face a mess of emotions I couldn't decode. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and heavy. Do you still love me, Elise? That simple question shattered the remaining walls around my heart. Tears streamed down my face, free now, unrestrained. I don't know, Felix, I whispered, my voice breaking. I don't know anymore, but I want to find it again. I want to understand how we got here. I turned towards Shadow, still standing there, unwavering. His deep, dark eyes seemed to hold every answer I couldn't find. I stepped closer, my hand gently brushing down his side, feeling the warmth of his coat. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to leave the barn, leave the darkness I had allowed myself to sink into for so long. Outside, the moon continued to cast its cold light, and in the chill of the night, I walked away, carrying with me the pain, the regret, and a flicker of hope that perhaps one day, I would find my way back to myself.